And so what this next hour is going to entail is really a framework around that. These are guides, this is advice. I want to arm you all as we start to think about going into the year-end review process and goal setting for next year. And so while I'm going to go through this document, I'm also going to give it to you all, and I'm going to post it on Jostle afterwards so you have it as a kind of a live toolkit going forward. I want this to be interactive, so after each section, I'm going to pause so we can ask questions, have some dialogue. There's a little exercise in here for us to do, because what training is not fun if you don't have an exercise. We're not going to talk about Paycom today, so I'm just going to throw it out there. We're going to talk about Paycom next week. So this is truly about the conversation, because that is the most important piece.
Hey, Marty.
Yes, Clark.
For those of you on the phone, if you have a question but are having reluctant to prompt in or whatever, you can ping me and I'll make sure it gets represented.
Thank you, Clark. So performance management. I'm not going to read all the words on these pages. You'll have this as your own toolkit, but it's really about designing to maximize our performance, as well as being an extension, really supporting the organization and our performance and our strategic priorities. It includes, like I just said, setting expectations, measuring employee behaviors, which we'll talk about a little bit, which will be new this year, providing coaching, ongoing, and feedback, and as well as evaluating performance. Again, the biggest thing that I'm going to talk about today is, and the most important thing is, how are we aligning our individual goals to really our organizational efforts and our goals? That's the most important thing. So it's whether it's Julie, I'm looking at you, or it's a barista, or it's one of our fabulous drivers, they should all understand how their goals tie back to our strategic priorities. While I know this time of year becomes, feels like a little daunting, and because there is some, and we're hoping to make it more administrative light, it's really such a benefit to our employees. It helps retain them, it helps attract them, it keeps them engaged, it helps them develop, and then it really helps our culture continue to be what it is today. And so that's what's most important. So I'm going to go through the agenda, and then I'm going to give you a little advice. And then you're going to hear the advice again on the back end, because if you go away with nothing else, that's what I want you to listen to. What is a performance review versus performance management? What's a performance management life cycle? Setting goals and expectation, providing continuous feedback, rating scales, which again will be new and it will be a shift for us, but we're going to talk about it a lot over the next 6 weeks. Conducting that conversation. What are some errors we can make as raters when we assign ratings to our teammates? And then, of course, and finally, the career development conversation. All right, so if you take nothing away, this slide and the last slide are the most important. Do not focus on what you're putting in a tool or on a piece of paper. Focus on the conversation you're having with the employee, because that's what they want to have. Go with 3 to 5 goals. Don't have 10. They aren't meaningful if you have a list of 10 goals and a list of 10 competencies. Focus on 3 to 5. Be very clear on what those expectations and goals are, and make sure it's a two-way dialogue. I mean, I know if Cara sent me my goals and said, here are your goals, and we'd have a conversation about it, like, well, what if I don't agree with that? Or maybe I think we should word that differently. Is that, are you really being fair to your own employee? Make sure there are no surprises. So you should never get to an review with an employee. And I know a lot of you have heard me say this over the last year, and have them be surprised by a piece of feedback. So telling them all year long, you've had a great year, you're doing this really well, and then you get to review. Yeah, but you really got to do this better. And this is why you're getting a partially meets instead of a meets or it exceeds. That is not fair, again, to your employee. Constant communication. So don't think the mid-year review and don't think the year-end review is it. You should really have a regular cadence with your team, and that, is up to your business, your department, and how you decide to do that. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. All right, so the performance life cycle. So the performance planning and goal setting process starts for us in July, August, September. Ongoing feedback. That should be one-on-one conversations throughout the year, not just at those review periods. You're going to hear me say that ad nauseum. Employee input. You should get your employees' input not only on their goals, but also their own performance. And that's where the evaluation of performance comes in. You're going to evaluate your own performance. Your manager is also going to evaluate your performance. and making sure you two have that conversation to align on what really the performance for that period looks like. And then finally, that performance review. And so what I hope will start happening, and is hopefully already happening, is that performance review is a really easy conversation because you've been talking all year about an employee's performance. And so that is my hope. Setting goals and objectives. And so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the slide. Many of you have heard this before. And this is why I say 3 to 5 goals. You want to have SMART goal criteria. Be specific, be measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Those are like the 5 criteria you want to have when you're thinking about setting goals. That is the most important thing. Goals and objectives, again, I said it earlier, they should align with our strategic plan. And so, like I said, if it's it's a cashier, it's a driver, it's Julie, it's Bob, it's Jennifer, it's me, we should all understand what our goals are and how they align to the strategic priority. And so we all get that pretty picture around July when we start to set goals, and your VPs typically start talking to you about what items that they're responsible for. Then you can start to figure out what your goals are to support that. And that's what you should be using that framework to have those conversations with your employees. My team, and I was going to put it in here and I didn't, we have a 1-page PowerPoint and we each have a color code. And all of our priorities are listed on there as they relate to what CAR's accountable for on the strategic plan. And so we each know what we're accountable for to help CAR meet his priorities for the year. Have the conversation. And so we've had a lot of dialogue. Should the employees create the goals? Should the VP cascade their goals? At the end of the day, there just needs to be a conversation about what those goals are. Do we agree on those goals? I may have goals that I want to work on that CAR hasn't thought about. CAR's got goals he wants me to work on that I haven't thought about. And so that conversation is really important. So you're aligned at the end of the day. We established milestone review dates. I'm going to show you a timeline here and at the end, but make sure you understand what the milestones are throughout the year. What's great about Habitat Charlotte is our timeline typically hasn't changed, at least in the year I've been here. So you won't have any surprises there. Communicate changes or redirections of goals and objectives in a timely manner. You want to make sure, again, talk about your goals on a regular basis. Make sure that you understand, like, okay, well, this goal has been accomplished. Do I want to add another goal? Or maybe this has been deprioritized for business reasons. And so what should we shift our priorities to? And so that having that conversation is really important. This is an example. And before we practice, I'm going to ask if there's any questions or comments. But these are examples of what SMART goals look like. And so I kind of tied them a little bit to us in some places, but I do want to have a couple minutes where everybody can think about their own roles or their team's roles and think about what are 1-2 SMART goals that you can create for your teams. And then we can talk about them. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions around what we've discussed thus far? Is any of this new? Are we practicing this today?
Try.
Yeah. So this, I think where maybe there could be some struggle is, I think, with some of the temporal aspects of these things, especially for like land development, where it's hard to tie. You get nervous about tying some of the time aspects to it because there's so many things that can be unforeseen.
Yeah.
So I mean, talking about it offline, but just I think that's some times where I struggle is what's realistic in terms of the time period to achieve something. If something gets stalled beyond your control or something like that.
So is it more of maybe the quality or the number of what you have to do versus the time frame?
Yeah, yeah.
Can I add a comment?
Yeah.
So, I think it's okay to have aggressive goals and to not meet them all. But there has to be communication and expectation setting. What's not okay is Laura and I've agreed on a goal, and 2 months after she finds out I didn't make it, right? So you tell a month ahead, I don't think I'm going to make it, right? So you set that expectation, so you communicate along the way. But I wouldn't be. I've seen people that get so worried about, well, I can't commit to that. because I might be a week late. And it's like, but at least put a deadline out there and set the expectation, have the communication along the way. And to me, if you hit 10 out of 10 goals, you probably weren't challenged enough. If you hit 7 out of 10, maybe that's actually pretty good because you were stretching and trying to push. I would rather have 10 goals and meet 7 than have 3 goals and meet 3. I mean, again, it depends on what the goal is and the meat in it and whatnot. It's not just a numbers game, but I guess my point is don't be afraid to have aggressive goals, and don't let that hold you up in terms of setting the goals. Like, well, I'm not going to commit to that because that's my perspective anyway. But you kind of need to agree that with your supervisor. Are they going to penalize you because you missed one, or are they going to celebrate the fact that you tried something aggressive and didn't quite make it? And you just need that clarity when you're setting the goals. So again, back to the no surprises, so that when you get to the end, it shouldn't be a big deal that, because you were communicating along.
But the same thing could be said about the goals themselves. So you should almost know what your goals are going to be for the next year that's coming up. You should know, for the most part, you should understand and know what your supervisor is going to put down for your goals. Give or take 1 or 2, maybe in one direction or the other. You should have a clear idea of what's coming down the pipe. Especially if you've worked with that person for an extended period of time.
Any other comments, questions?
I think sometimes it can be hard to figure out a meaningful goal when the work is so interdependent on a lot of other departments or teams that you don't have direct control over. So like fundraising goals are tied to projects and, production schedules and build ships and delays and things. So trying to figure out like what is a meaningful goal that we can control. If a land purchase falls through, that person doesn't get dinged because it fell through, it just happened. So can you speak kind of to setting a meaningful goal that maybe isn't as tied, or that you can be more responsible for personally, even though we work so interdependently?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that goes back to the business is shifting constantly, right? And so, Jennifer, for your example, the land project falls through. Well, your priorities have immediately changed. And so you and Bob will probably have a conversation, right? So this isn't obviously going to happen right now. So we're going to move your priorities here. And so that would adjust the goal a little bit. I think that's the most important piece, but acknowledging that and having the conversation. I mean, I've had Lakar in the basement, like, this isn't going to happen for X, Y, and Z. And he's like, all right, well then let's move and focus your efforts here. And so I already know 3 things that are happening that are definitely going to change what some of my goals are for the next 3 to 4 months, just simply because of what has just transpired in the last 30 days.
And I think part of it is kind of understanding what the organization's overarching goal is. So some of the stuff is still being solidified in terms of what the plan is, but there's going to be some goal around getting this many houses built and this many families in the houses, right? Completing this many repairs, those things. So if you think about it at that level, Bob's team builds the house, but family services doesn't have the family ready, or the family's ready, the house isn't ready, then we didn't succeed as an organization. So the goals get to be very interdependent, but yeah, we all have to sign up for not just my individual piece, but for the collective. And that's where you have to have the kind of cross-functional collaboration and whatnot. And if you're having to where your goals are dependent on another team, I think that's important, not just to have the conversation with your supervisor, but with that other team and maybe their boss around, like, the only way that we can do this is if John and I both do our part and, it gets to be to hit the organization goal. And those are great conversations to have. They're not necessarily natural conversations to have.
The other thing I might add to think about in goal setting is you can have goals that are both input and output, right? So output goals would be how many families did we serve? That's an output goal, right? And maybe not everybody can control the output, but you can control some of your role on the input, right? So, if it's around fundraising, maybe it's, how many, donor calls were made on a monthly basis, or, how many applications or families did we interact with? So some of those are inputs that lead to the output. And sometimes you have more personal control over your input than maybe the full output. Collectively, as an organization, we have output goals that we're trying to accomplish our mission. And so I think when you're thinking about for yourself and for your teams, what's that mix of input goals that you can control that lead to the outputs that we're trying to achieve, right? So I think kind of trying to have a little bit of sensitivity to kind of both sides of that equation. Input that you can control leads to the output that we want collectively.
So let's practice. So let's just take a couple minutes, and if you have pen and paper or your phones, just type out or write out what is a goal that you would assign for yourself or one of your teammates that follows our SMART priorities. Okay, ready? Well, Jeremy nodded, so I'm gonna pick on Jeremy.
Yeah.
You wanna share?
Sure. So one of my goals for the team is to create 250 profiles, donor profiles over the course of the year. Because we're often in meetings where we're like, who's this person? Where did they come from? What are they interested in? Why did they give to us? You know, what prompted that gift? Could they do more? And the answer is usually, I don't know. We tried to call, they didn't call us. So by just encouraging my team to create these profiles, it's going to encourage them to have more meetings, have more face-to-face, have more conversations. I'm hoping that'll lead into not only better data collection in our system, but more strategic ask and upgrades and major gifts. Because we are hitting a much larger number than we've been assigned in the past for FYs.
And what does everybody think? Does it meet our SMART objectives? That one. Who else wants to share?
So I'll volunteer because this one would impact everybody in the room. So this is, again, is about setting a goal that maybe I don't have 100% control over. But this is something I would love to roll out next year. Implementing quarterly forecasting by department using more Martis in FY 2024. So I would not have control of everybody in the room to make it happen. But you know, it could be a goal that if I can align with my teammates and I think is a worthwhile goal.
More?
Cutting monthly expenses that we can control in stores. Trash, for instance, electricity, making sure the doors are closed, not accepting certain donations, so again, we can cut back on trash,
Do you have a percentage tied to that?
10%.
So those are great examples of what a SMART goal looks like. Again, you'll have this, so you can like reference these if you're gonna be assigning goals out to your team, what these look like, but you know, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and you know, within the time frame. All right, so this is gonna be new for us this year. And I don't want you all to be scared about this because this is gonna be in partnership with your VPs. But we're introducing this year competencies. They're used to highlight how someone is doing at performing their job, not just what they're doing to perform their job. And so these are just 3 examples. These are not 3 of ours, but these are just 3 examples of what a competency could look like. Each of your VPs is going to select 3 to 5 competencies that are relevant to your departments, with the caveat of every department will have, living and representing our core values and mission. That will be, everyone in the organization will have that one, because I think that is of utmost importance. So I'll be working with the VPs over the next couple weeks to pick those for fiscal year 24. But this is new for next year.
Question.
Sure.
So using these as an example, so we would have one goal tied to team building.
So you'll
that
have,
represents, and then one goal that's tied to, I know that these aren't the ones,
Yeah,
but you'd have different goals tied to each.
so you'll have your goals, which are what you're doing to perform your job, and then you'll have competency. So you'll have
Okay.
both. You'll have both.
Good. Okay, there.
Great question.
So you might not have if you had employee development, you might not have a specific goal,
Mhm.
but it's something that kind of persists through how you're operating and how you're doing, or like customer focus, right? So there may or may not be a specific deliverable in terms of, a number that goes with it, but it's still around. If that's a critical aspect of your job, how are you doing?
Any other questions on competencies?
I won't lie, I'm a little confused. Because typically in other places I've been, competency was something required to do your job. So like financial acumen as an example. And so maybe these are just more broad-based.
They are. So you
Then-
might pick financial acumen as one of
Okay.
yours. Yep. There's a list that we have selected, and that we've been provided that you will say, this is what I need for my department. Financial acumen might be one of them. Bob may have 3 or 4 entirely different ones.
Construction or.
Right, yeah.
Project management or whatnot.
Right,
I
yeah.
That's where I was. a little
That's why it
confused.
just made these very broad, because like, I would perceive retail will have something along the lines of customer service or customer focus, based on the nods I'm getting from the back of the room.
And Marty, these are, just to separate, these are not a personal competencies. These are duties, responsibilities as the position, because from the background where I come from, competencies were attributes, characteristics of the individual that gave the position the ability to be flexible in how they move forward as the individual. But we're going the opposite way of giving the position the competencies, which gives the person to mold themselves into being a better employee within that position, correct?
Yeah, it's really what's expected in how to perform the job.
And I think that's supposed to help with the pathways, right? Like to make sure you're meeting certain competencies of a job role. And then if there's another one you want to reach, what are the competencies you need to make to get there, right? So like
Yeah, a
for a
little
job role,
Yeah.
less
So they
individual.
will vary then by role.
Will vary by department.
But not by role.
On the flip side, is there
Not today.
opportunity if someone is struggling meeting these competencies? Do we have some type of plan to help them grow those competencies or some kind of
That is
or
the,
why?
yep. So we can work with you if you have an employee that's struggling there to say, okay, they're struggling. Here's what we can do to help them. Whether it's training, whether it's, someone they need to work with to get some mentorship or have you. But yes, we could work with you to say they're struggling here.
So it's gonna be more of a case by case. There's no predetermined kind of here opportunities where we can.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, some of these things depends on what it is, but again, it can be
Right.
as simple as going into LinkedIn Learning and looking at, hey, what are the courses on customer focus, and you can probably get a list. So it depends. Some of the competencies may not be that easy, but again, it's an opportunity to create a conversation with somebody that says, hey, this is an area that you need to work on. And so you need to know that, but then how do we
Right.
work to help you in that area?
Absolutely.
And then, if it's one that's very straightforward, and maybe you figure it out on your own, and it's one that like, I'm struggling with this a little bit, so that's a Marnie call to say, Marnie, I'm like, I think, this is a competency, this person's not, can you suggest, so involve the HR team
I mean,
to help you
to
address
me,
it.
this is only valuable if we respond when they need to develop those competencies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
so if we're not intentional about that and my hope was that you would answer like you did, that it's not just gonna be me responding with my ideas, right? That they want to see the support of the affiliate,
Of course,
you know, helping them and other teammates work on competencies that need to be developed.
So one of my goals, I'll tell you before I tell Carr, is for each,
Then we'll have to negotiate to agree.
we'll talk about it, is, you know, I want to create learning paths for each of the competencies that we select for 2024. Because again, you're going to come to me maybe and say, Marnie, you know, she's struggling on customer focus. Like, what is the learning path here? And so I've already got LinkedIn Learning saying they will help us build those learning paths based on, you know, the competencies that we select.
Are those competencies going to be standardized across different departments? Like if there's two departments that have a similar competency, would it be standardized or is it going to be unique to?
So like I said, every VP is going to pick their own competency. And so if Bob picks customer focus and you pick customer focus, the definition will be the same.
I'm wondering what this looks like, I guess, in departments where you have a lot of different people and a lot of different types of roles. So like that seems really easy in a, not easy, but more achievable in like the restore setting or in construction where everyone is doing the same type of role.
Yes.
Maybe on the construction side of that. But then when you have like, we do not do the same job.
Right.
Definitely, you know, it's very different what Brennan's doing in mortgage servicing than what I'm doing. So then how will these be set where they're general enough to apply to an entire department, but specific enough where you know how to take action on them?
So I'm gonna pick on Chris. I know he's on the phone, but like it might be that we all sit down together and say, and figure that out. Can we pick 3 to 5 that, you know, work for the entire department? Or do we have to break them down a little bit? That's gonna be a little bit more manual intensive on the back end, but we can do it. It just will require a little bit more lifting. I would hope just to keep it high level this year, just because it's the first time we're introducing them. But if we feel like we need to break them down, we can do that.
Can you say a little more about the why of the competency? I think I'm missing that part of like, what's the value add and why is it important to start doing?
Sure. So I'm just going to keep using customer service. So like, let's say customer service has a revenue goal of making $500 a day. But they treat their customers poorly. Are they really doing a good job? And so it's not only about what they're doing, but how are they performing their job? Does that make sense?
Why wouldn't it be baked into the regular goals?
Well, it typically isn't. It's separate, at least in my experience. You can have that be a part of it, but this ensures that we're capturing that consistently across the organization.
It's almost like, go ahead. I'm gonna try some lay language and see if I get it right. Marty is far enough away, she can't kick me. So to be a little bit on, the goals and skills versus competencies, you can have a surgeon that is really masterful at surgery, but is horrible at bedside manner.
Like soft skill versus hard skill.
Yes.
To me, competencies
Yes.
is how you do it's kind of how you execute and how you interact. Whereas, your goals are more, specific to the strategic plan, the role in the organization, the skills that you have, that kind of thing. But the competency, so a surgeon could meet the goal that, all the surgeries were perfect, but everybody hates working with them. They're mean to the nurses and they're horrible with customer service. So their competency would be bad, right? The competency of customer satisfaction would be bad, but the goal of completing surgeries on time and accurately would be met. So it's that ability to try and marry up both the goals and the outcomes with some of the how we do our work, right? Which is why the one that is not discretionary is leaning into and living out our core values as an organization, right? Like that is how we, work in this community and how we work across teams and with each other. That's not discretionary, customer focus, some of those team building. So some of that is how you do the work in addition to, you could be meeting your goals, but not living into the competencies that are important for the organization. Did I say that right, Marty? Okay.
I think sometimes the competencies typically, I think, are measured in a very different way than the strategic goals are measured. So I appreciate this opportunity because sometimes it's hard to have measurable goals that are capturing some of, even like the first example you said, increased customer satisfaction. Well, what's the tool to measure?
Right.
customer satisfaction, right? So it's just evaluated at a different.
Well, and one of the things I'm gonna talk about in a minute is when you're getting ready and you're preparing for a review conversation, a lot of the ways to measure the how or the competency is getting feedback from customers, external, internal. I'm gonna come out to a lot of you at year end and say, please provide feedback on my team. You're all my internal and my team's internal customers. And so you work with them every day. I know what I observe, but what do you all observe? And that is a really important input to being able to measure those competencies. These are all great questions, by the way. And I know that I don't want the dialogue on this topic in particular to stop here. So, you know, as we start to plan for fiscal year 24 and the VPs and I start talking more about the competencies in the coming weeks, like I would hope that we can have some one-on-one dialogue to talk about what this means for your teams too. And how do you talk about it with your teams? Every performance management system really will talk about continuous feedback. And so, you know, making sure you've got certain milestones around talking about goals, talking about, you know, progress reports or project charters and milestones. Again, revisiting goals if they have to be revisited or just start over with a different goal. Making sure you have that open communication. So I'll tell you what I do with my team. I'll tell you what I do with CAR. Not necessarily the answers to the test, but we meet one-on-one every week. CAR and I, my team and I also meet one-on-one. So I would say at minimum, you're not having conversations on a regular cadence with your teammates, that should start. Because again, my biggest thing is no surprises when you get to the review. And so part of that one-on-one conversation should be constant dialogue around priorities, achievements, what do you need help with? And however that works for you, but that will help you really set you up for that review and make that conversation that much easier. So I put a slide together for just some questions. I am not formal by any stretch of any imagination. I think all of you know that. My team will tell you that. So earlier in my career, I used a framework like this as I was preparing one-on-one conversations. I gave this as kind of a guide for you all to use if you need help kind of preparing for one-on-one conversations or an agenda for your teammates. But this is just something I want to put out here as a recommendation, as a tool for you all to use. Rating scale. This is new. This is going to be new. This is going to be a culture shift. I expect to spend a couple minutes here. Mark has a question.
I do. So years ago, we had a rating scale of 1 to 7, I think it was, or 1 to 8. And we had to rate ourselves. And the biggest thing that we had a problem with was that people always used to put down that they walked on water.
Yeah.
In their own personal, self-evaluation. So when you went and you had a conversation with them and you brought them back down to reality, that's where some of the conflict came from.
Yeah.
So are we gonna rate ourselves on our self-evaluations? And then we're gonna rate, then we're gonna be rated?
Yeah.
Because again, that's where some of the conflict will come up again.
So yes, thank you for teeing that up.
That allows for open discussion though. And but like you said, that's where that no surprises should be there. So if I'm thinking I'm walking on water and I'm right in the middle, we should have had those conversations there. But then at that point, it allows for that two-way discussion during that process.
So I'll tell you before I get into this, the DEIJ and ET team have been involved in testing the new tool, providing feedback on this. So Clive, I'll pick on you. I know you've been involved in some of the conversations. If you have any of your perspective that you want to share, as we've introduced this over the last couple months. But so we have gotten feedback around this already of should we do 3? Should we do 4? Should we do 2? And so this is where we've landed. And so, yes, Mark, it is going to create some conflict, but I'm hoping as you have conversations during the year, like I'm hoping you all are or will, that you won't be so far apart when you come back together to have that conversation. But everyone is still going to do a self-evaluation, and every manager is still going to do a review, and the manager's going to rate the employee, and the employee is going to rate themselves.
Okay, and the reason why I bring that up, there are some roles in the organization, and everybody is important. Everybody has the same, equal playing field. But there are some roles, drivers, donation assistants, that are constantly doing the same role day in and day out. So most of the time, they believe that they are doing an exceptional job, and the vast majority of the time they are. However, there are times when you have to reel them back a little bit. And they forget about those times when, except when you go and they do the self-evaluation. And that's where, again, they kind of think that everything is 100% perfect, even though you are having conversations throughout the year, but the things are forgotten. And then when you go and you do the self-evaluation and then the evaluation, it's like, oh my God, where is this coming from?
And so, again, I don't want to go too much into Paycom, but like there will be ways to track goals in Paycom now, real time throughout the year. And so you can document your one-on-one conversations if you choose to. You can, so you can stay ahead of that. The competencies will also help. And so the drivers might be, and I met all the drivers might be doing great in what we're asking them to do, but how they're doing it. I mean, I could think of a couple of examples where we've got some, how they're doing the job. Yeah.
I've seen this, every company has some version of this. And my last company, had a little bit more information that I think was helpful because we would struggle. I think we were talking about it's talking about person that meets versus person that exceeds, right? Somebody partially, you probably had a lot of serious conversations and then you know that. But it's the meets and exceeds. And the way ours were worded, like there might be another sentence that says, so for meets, you're meeting all your goals and maybe you're exceeding in one of your goals or two of your goals, right? Versus exceeds, so that somebody that says, well, I exceeded on these two, but I met these three, just to kind of help delineate between that meets and that exceeds. So exceeding, maybe you're exceeding on the vast majority, and maybe you stepped in and taken on additional stretch opportunities or whatever that may be.
No, that's helpful. I was even thinking as we roll this out more broadly, like what does an example of each look like?
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And the one thing I will say, so we've had On Track, we've had Off Track, I think has been the ratings tool system for a couple of years. This is going to allow us to differentiate our performers too. And so recognizing our exceeds performers, recognizing those that might need to improve in some areas and that might need additional help, but also celebrate those that are doing exactly what we want them to do and expect them to do. Unfortunately, we've all been there. We also have those that just are not performing well in their jobs. And so we need to be able to highlight those because those are different conversations that we need to be having. And so my kind of rule of thumb is if they're on a performance plan, they should be a does not meets.
I think you and Julie kind of talked your way into it, but when you say examples, are you gonna say like, and most people are at meets expectations, except when they're really doing something special, like, it just meets expectations, the base of where you're expecting most people to be.
Yeah, so
That would be the most-
I'll do something like that, yes. Well, I don't want to put any like X amount of people will be here, but yes, yeah, there will be some framework and expectation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So-
Most people are at meets.
And if that's communicated ahead of time, if you
Yes.
understand, well, I'm not exceeding everything.
And
I'm
the
at
other-
meets.
The other thing on the partially meets, if you just took on a new job, you're probably partially meets because you probably,
We were
meets
probably
is-
exceeded before.
Yeah,
took
right.
on new responsibilities and now.
So you should assume that, unless you're like, where somebody could walk in and meet meets is I did this job before somewhere else. And I walked in and I just hit the ground running because I already knew how to do it. It's very unlikely in most cases. So there's no stigma in being partially meets.
I would be cautious there though, because in my feedback from honest dialogue, the partially meets, a lot of times it's tied to your race.
Yeah.
So I don't want to put somebody that's new in a role and go, well, you partially meet, so 0, right? And I think that's where the one at the bottom, the too new to rate is really good for those situations where somebody is 3 months in their role. They're too new to rate, but they seem to be doing okay. And they seem to be, it's not a discussion where there's a performance issue.
Well, and I'll give an example. Early in my career, I had started, it was my first job at Bank of America. I had started, the quarter was coming to an end. I was recruited, we were tied in metrics. Well, I started in July, obviously end of the quarter, September. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to hit this objective. I've only been here. And my manager was a new manager. And I'm like, so am I going to be a does not meets? He was like, well, you can't meet your goals. So I talked to his manager. I'm like, look, I've never been a does not meets in my career. And she's like, you're not going to be a does not meets. You just started. She's like, you're too new to rate. And I was like, Because again, it ties to a lot of things and
Yeah, and I think, we got to work through some of the nuances. It's a little bit different of I'm tuning to rate because I'm brand new to the organization, or is it I'm tuning to rate because I changed roles. And so I took on new responsibility, but I should be rated on the year, not on
6
the
months
job
in that
that I've
role
been
and
doing.
then you- yeah.
So there's, it's back to like, there's a year rating that affects your raise. And then there's a rating that affects your, like, what are you doing right now and how do you do that? So there's some nuances of that for people that change roles, and we'll have to talk through that. But I think you do somebody a disservice if they're new and you tell them that their needs. Because then they're like, well, yeah, there's a year from now, I'm just gonna pull it out of the
Right,
water.
right.
And that may not be, that may be the case, but very likely it isn't the case. You were just giving them the benefit of the doubt because they were new. And that's where I do think this two-year rate can come in, or as long as we're clear and consistent on how we deal with it partially.
Yeah. And again, back to what you were saying, it's all about the conversation. You can have that conversation and say, you're off to a great start, you're doing well in these 3 areas. These 2 areas, you need to grow a little, but you can still keep it very, very positive. And whether that person is rated as too new to rate or meets or whatever, you can get it in the conversation. Yeah.
All right, so conducting the review. And so this is simply to prepare for the meeting, is make sure you understand what your teammates' goals and job description are. Start collecting and reviewing performance notes that you've gathered. Again, ask for feedback like I talked about earlier. I mean, that's important. So, if you're not doing that today, like ask your internal stakeholders, partners, customers, like for feedback, because you don't know unless it's shared with you. Again, you're going to get you want the self-assessments to be done 2 weeks in advance, so you have time to review and prepare. Obviously, do not do a review in a public setting, like someplace that's private and comfortable, because 90% of our conversations are going to be relatively positive, but there are those difficult conversations that you're going to have. It should be a two-way dialogue. How do you think, I always start with my teammate. How do you think you did this year? Tell me some of your accomplishments. What do you want to work on? What are some of your development opportunities? And we have that two-way dialogue. It's not just me speaking at them or them speaking at me. It's about going back and forth and giving each other feedback. And my team is not shy. They give me feedback all day long, whether they agree with me or not. So again, the biggest thing, feedback should never be a surprise.
So quick plug, job descriptions, they're all out on Teams. You don't know where to find them. Marty's team can point you to, but they're all out Teams. So it is good to go back because, and nobody's gonna be perfectly aligned with their job description. Usually there's an element of other duties as applied. But if you sit there and go, but his job description is this, but he's only doing 10% of that, he's doing 90% of this, it's a conversation around, maybe we need to either change the job description or let the person get the job description and the HR team can do.
So now that that's brought up, are we gonna have everybody sign their job descriptions again, like we've done at certain times? Or are we gonna?
We have them sign them when we're told their job description has changed or when they change jobs, but we won't go back and have them re-sign all their job descriptions now, unless you guys come back to us and say, you've got several jobs that have changed, which I hope is the
And I
case.
think, some people, the job description matters a whole lot, and some people it doesn't matter nearly as much. So I think it's partly a conversation and recognition from the supervisor around, hey, this is one that we need to make sure that, there's 100% alignment or it's loose.
And the only reason why I ask is I know probably a couple of months ago, Lauren went back in and she had all the HR stuff, those top, 8, 9 lines, whatever it was. So that, a lot of that stuff wasn't on the job descriptions that a lot of people signed. That's the only reason why.
Are you talking about like band and level? Are you talking about that piece?
Mhm.
Hopefully everyone's had the discussion with their employees so they know what their band and level is.
We started and wouldn't have that information, like if they started after all of that.
I'll check with Lauren, but hopefully they were told as a part of the hiring process. But Lauren, I know you're on, we'll take it offline and talk about it.
But I guess my advice would be, as a leader, you should, as you're preparing for the review, look at the job description. Based on that, think about, is this something we need to deliberately have a conversation about as part of the review? Or
yeah, the person's, reasonably aligned and based on the situation, I don't think we need to actually discuss it. So, because, yeah, it just depends on the person and how, and the job and how.
There's going to be some element of meaningful and measurable for the employee at the very root of all of this. Because meaningful and measurable from a strategic piece all the way down to how we employ to get the organization's goals met, will have to start with something. That's the job description. So we can discuss.
Get a lot of stares from around the room.
I will say that the job descriptions on Teams do not post bands or levels in them, so I don't know if they're supposed to, but at least for our team, they're not in there, so I don't know if we need them to be.
I know the bands and all that is in Paycom. I know it's on the back end of Paycom. I'm not 100% certain.
They are in Paycom.
Right.
Hey, Lauren, are you there?
Job descriptions.
There's a folder on Teams, so I'll just ask all of you, we'll get it out to everybody, and so you can review your job descriptions. And just let us know, when are there any changes? But all the bands and levels are in Paycom now, and they are accurate for each of your employees.
And the job descriptions on Teams, you're gonna share with all staff?
I think they already are.
I mean, people, they're out there. There was an announcement
There's no
sent out.
locks on it or anything.
No, there was an announcement sent out at some point about, hey, this is where they're posted, but, people look out on that. Okay, we can take that.
Yep, we got it. So some common things that can happen, and I'm not going to read the specific title, but there's some things that can happen when you're preparing for a review or you're giving a review is like, one, you can focus on something somebody does really well and they do it really well all the time. That kind of overshadows some other things. We all have development opportunities. Car, you're not allowed to talk about mine right now. But everybody has development opportunities. And so I've seen a lot of people focus on these few characteristics that people do really well. And they're not being fair to the employee by saying, but here are some things that you can work on and continue to help and grow in your role. The opposite effect, there could be something that someone does that continues to be a development opportunity, but 90% of the rest of their performance is great. But this one attribute, for whatever reason, just continues to stand out, and that's what someone focuses on. And so again, just make sure you're being very objective when you're thinking about that. Again, the one thing that we need to do a really good job of is differentiating. The ratings, I think, will help do that. The competencies will help do that. So we're not just different. We're not just kind of, I call it peanut buttering. It's a very formal HR word, but peanut buttering ratings across the team. Leniency, again, we've all seen it happen. Assigning, again, just meets across the team because they don't want to have difficult conversations. Focusing on recent performance. Mark, your great point about the drivers. They forget about conversations you had 6 months ago. Well, managers have done the same thing where they focus on the performance for the last 3 months instead of talking about the period in total. And then finally, similarity or like me. We all have people on our teams that are much more like us than others. And, are we favoring them more than others? I hope not. I hope we're being objective and treating everyone as an individual and measuring their performance based on their jobs. And so again, just to highlight some of these common errors that are out there, but once again, one of the ways to, gather feedback is to ask others.
Do we have a formal way of doing that, like through Paycom or anything, or just
There
like
is,
random reach out?
It's funny when I started and they did the start, stop, and continue. Here I was like, oh, I do that all the time. And so, what I have typically done in the past is I'll send an email out to, key partners and customers. What should X start doing? What should they stop doing? What should they continue doing? And so we don't have a formal template document, what have you. It could be as simple as schedule a 15-minute conversation, shoot an email like that. But we don't have anything formal created to do that.
One quick thing, and then I'll be quiet. Is there any possible way that when we go and we sit down, we have the conversations with everybody, that we would know what everybody's raise is going to be, if there is going to be a raise, because it takes out that third meeting, if you will, of having to sit down with everybody, just for time constraints.
And
We did that.
We know the timing
years
is
ago.
not the amount.
yeah. The short answer is no.
Okay.
Yeah, the short answer is no. I've been in two schools of thumb where it's, you have the conversation at the same time as the review and you don't. I'm a person that prefers to do it separate because then it doesn't take away from the conversation around someone's performance and career development. That's my opinion. Laura, you can school me later on that if you want.
No, I think, again, I think we're setting goals for the whole year. We're talking about what's been accomplished in the past year and goal setting for the next year. And I think that all of that then informs some of the comp adjustments, right? Like, so it's hard to do comp adjustments without the input of all of the performance and goal setting should be a two-way conversation. So we do all that first, get that informs the comp changes. So so I think I'm a fan of doing it that way because then we have that input. Otherwise, we're setting comp decisions without engaging in the two-way conversation with our associates. And then, you get some of that halo and horn effect if you haven't, really talked through, so there's an opportunity to improve here, or you did great. Thanks for reminding me in your self-evaluation about all the great things you did, So I think having the goal setting in a conversation informs the.
That, and it allows you to have a conversation with your VP too, because you want to get their perspective. They're gonna want your feedback, I'm assuming, on what the increase is going to be. So we need to allow for time with that, for that too.
So I have a question with the ratings. So we're gonna do the self-evaluation as well as provide the ratings. How is this gonna tie in together for decision making? Like, is it weighted more one way than the other? Are we gonna take the two and get to a balance in between?
Are you talking about the goals and the competencies?
Well, I'm talking about when they go through they do the ratings, need, succeed. Well, I know those aren't the right words.
I mean, I think the one that matters is,
Yeah.
right? So I want to know what you think, and I'm going to give you my perspective, my lens, working for me in terms of what the ratings are, because basically the supervisor is going to have to talk with the VP and say, this person, they were solid, so they should get a solid. That meets grades, or they were differentiated when you scored high. I think they should go for it. And then look at it, and then ultimately, just so you guys know as well, once the supervisors and VPs agree, the VPs will put in a tool within Marty and Laura will do a final review to make a determination of looking at consistency, how to match the overall budget, and all that kind of stuff. To reconcile. And generally, they don't make changes, but they have made changes in the past to either increase or decrease. So that can happen.
So I guess as a supervisor, and this is just for me, I can't talk for anybody else, but what I can take is their self-eval and really try to figure out their thoughts behind it, and then look at where I am and then come to that median in between. So it'll also prep me for that conversation that we're gonna have.
That's right. And you may not agree with them. I mean, you may not agree with them, and that's okay. You don't have to change your ratings to meet theirs, but what you have to do to be able to do is have a conversation with them about why your ratings are different. That's the piece that's most important. So I'm gonna scroll through. So again, it's the same page you saw at the beginning. My initial advice is the same as my final advice. I know it's gonna be easier said than done because I've been playing in it for a while, but like, do not focus on the documentation. Do not focus on pay comp. Focus on the conversation. Focus on setting great goals and having the conversation. Not surprising, and that is the most important piece. Again, just focus on, if nothing else, I want to hear from everybody come August, September. My manager had a really great conversation with me. I understand what my goals are. I understand what my ratings were, what they were. And that's my hope. Now, I know hope is not a strategy, but that is my hope for this final review season. And so this is a first piece in helping arm all of you with that information to help prepare for that as well.
And so I think a key part of it is making people feel some appreciation, right? That you're glad they're here. I think you're doing well at these things. I'd like to see you work on those things, right? Like that's to me is a good outcome is they feel valued, they feel appreciated. They also understand the goals, and then they understand where they need to focus. And if you come out of the conversation and they don't think there's anything to work on, it probably wasn't a good conversation. Maybe they felt good about it because John didn't tell me I needed to do anything different. But I think that's a hollow conversation because now I don't have anything that I need to go work on. And no matter how well you're doing, you still can grow.
So career development conversations, it's 1:00. I am happy to schedule more time to talk about career development because there are some other tools I know certain people in this room are really going to be excited to review and talk about more. But everybody on our teams is unique. They all have different capabilities. They all have different aspirations. They're all working towards different things. And so this is kind of what the kind of the cycle of what a career development conversation should look like. And when I think about you all wanting to have those conversations, you're going to get tough questions. How can I possibly achieve my career goals if there are no new open positions? What can I do to recover from mistakes that I may have made to damage my reputation? How can I talk about my accomplishments without sounding arrogant? I get that one all the time. And so you're going to get those, and you just have to be prepared to answer them.
But on that is, I think it's fair to say, I'll have to think about it and I'll get back with you next Thursday. Right? So if instead of just like making something up, and then that's a conversation with Marnie around, hey, this person asked me this tough question, I'm kind of thinking about it. Can you help me talk through and think through an appropriate answer? So don't be afraid to ask for a little bit of time to answer so you can give them.
You also want to ask them questions, get personal and be real. And so don't be afraid to be vulnerable and sharing your experience as a part of that, but also, hope that they will be vulnerable and being real with you about where their heads are as well. To Carr's point, a lot of us will be planned to have these conversations as a part of the performance review, I hope, but plan for it, anticipate what you're going to be asked. You're going to be asked different things by every single one of your employees because, again, where they are, who they are in this circle is very different. Be honest. Like the worst disservice you can do to your employees is to not tell them the truth. And so be honest and really engage them and include them as a partner in their own development. And so, if you say to them, look, we don't have a position today that meets your needs, but here's some things we can do together to help get you ready for that next step. And it could be cross training. It could be a lateral move. It could be, what have you, but just engage them in that conversation, but be very honest and don't make promises you can't keep. The last page, and I'm going to schedule more time for us because I think we need to go through this. You all have been asking and it is done. Shannon provided a lot of feedback. Laura's weighed in on this. Denver actually helped us as well. But everybody's been asking, what does a band 4 look like as it relates to scope and knowledge and experience? These are guidelines. So don't come to me tomorrow and say, I read this and it said that band 8 does this, but my rule doesn't do that. These are guidelines. They are not the hard and fast truth. But when you're having conversations with your team and they say, I want to go from a band 6 to a band 7, you can say, well, here's what that might look like. Here are some things you need to do to grow and develop. So in the coming weeks, I will schedule another lunch and learn, and we will talk more about this.